5 men rode into the mountains that night, and not one of them ever came back. Yet there was no firefight, no explosion, not even a clear footprint to show which way they went, and 40 years later I can still see the truck lying on its side with the dashboard light glowing like an eye in the dark, waiting for someone to notice that nothing about that scene made sense. And before I tell you what we found in that valley, do one thing for yourself and hit subscribe so you don't miss how this story ends. Because once you hear it, you'll never look at an empty road the same way again. It was March of 1983, northern Honduras, that hour just after dawn when the light is grey and the jungle hasn't decided if it wants to wake up yet. I'd been in country 3 weeks, still learning the rhythms of the hills, still trying to pretend the heat didn't bother me. Our small Delta team was working a quiet job back then. No flags, no patches, just plain clothes, unmarked rifles, and a simple mission on paper: walk the border trails, watch who used them, and send reports back to people who never signed their real names. Guerrillas from Nicaragua pushed north, Honduran units pushed back, and somewhere between those two currents we moved, a handful of Americans and a young Honduran recon platoon. My team leader was a calm captain, the kind of man who could look at a bad situation and never raise his voice. Our radio man was barely old enough to rent a car back home, but he treated radio signals like puzzles he could solve if you just gave him enough time. Our medic was older than the rest of us, carrying a quiet weight in his chest he pretended was nothing, and our youngest shooter was strong, steady, and still figuring out how to pace himself under a rucksack that felt like half his body weight. I took point most of the time because I knew how to read ground without talking about it. The Hondurans who joined us for that mission were lean, tired-looking soldiers with worn boots and rifles older than I was. Their lieutenant was eager, too eager, the way a man looks when he's sure this next patrol is the one that will earn him a line in somebody's file. The night before everything went wrong, a helicopter dropped us near an old logging cut. From there we moved on foot, following a narrow mountain track toward the border. The trail snaked along the side of a ridge, half washed out and barely wide enough for a single truck. We were told no regular convoy used it anymore, that it was only for smugglers and the occasional mule train. Perfect for watching traffic. Perfect, we thought, for a quiet mission. We walked most of that night, staying off the skyline, listening to the jungle breathe around us. Our job was simple: reach a bend in the road that overlooked a valley, hide, and take notes on whoever passed through. If we saw something dangerous enough, large arms shipment, heavy fighters, we'd call it up. Otherwise, we were just shadows with notebooks. That was what we thought anyway. Just after first light, we came around a turn and saw the truck. It lay on its side in a shallow cut below the road, nose crumpled against mud and rock. One rear wheel still spinning slowly, as if it hadn't made up its mind to stop. Everyone froze the same instant. It wasn't the sight of a wreck that did it. We'd all seen crash sites before. It was the feeling that rolled over us like a cold wind. The air around that truck felt wrong, too still, as if the jungle itself had stepped back to watch. There should have been birds shrieking, monkeys crashing branches, insects singing so loud you wanted to stuff your ears. Instead, we heard our own breathing and the faint tick of the cooling engine. The Honduran lieutenant muttered something under his breath and made a tiny cross on his chest. The captain glanced at me and jerked his chin toward the slope. I slid down first. The dirt had been torn up by the roll, soft and loose under my boots. But once I reached the bottom and the disturbed soil ended, the ground looked untouched, smooth as a floor. The cab door hung half open. One green dash light glowed steady inside, painting the wreck's interior in a sickly color. I reached in and laid a hand on the engine block. Warm, not hot. The crash was recent, a few hours at most. The seat was streaked with dark, drying blood. Not a spray, not a slaughter, just lines and smears where someone had been thrown forward, hard enough to split skin. I checked for drag marks, footprints, any sign of wounded men stumbling away. Nothing. The dirt at the base of the cab was clean, no drops, no handprints, no knee marks. A man who bled that much would leave a trail whether he wanted to or not. Inside the cab, Gear lay scattered as if whoever rode there had been caught mid-sentence. Helmets, web belts, a rifle on the floor, with a full magazine still locked in. Someone had wiped nothing, taken nothing, moved nothing. It looked like time had simply snapped and then refused to move forward. Up on the road, the captain and Honduran lieutenant walked the curve in both directions, looking for skid marks, signs of another vehicle, anything. The track behind us was unbroken. The track ahead was the same. No fresh tire impressions, no gouges from brakes locking up, no sign the truck had ever approached from either direction. Maybe it came from the other side, the lieutenant said, but his voice had no conviction. I checked the rear of the truck. The tarp covering the cargo bed hung half loose. One strap snapped. Underneath sat several metal drums secured in place. The stenciled label on them read fertilizer in neat black letters. The paint looked new, too new, sharp around the edges, like it had never seen a single hard day on a dirt road. I leaned closer and caught a faint, sweet smell drifting from somewhere near the lids. It wasn't fuel, it wasn't rot. It reminded me of cleaning fluid from supply depots, but sharper, like something that wanted to sting if you breathed deep enough. I stepped back without thinking. The captain slid down to join me, took one look at the drums, and his jaw tightened more than when he'd seen the blood. He flipped through a small manifest booklet he'd found on the passenger seat. The writing was neat, the unit names neat, but nothing about them felt right to him. I could see it in his eyes. He folded the papers and tucked them into his chest pocket as if he wanted them somewhere safe and close until he could think. Our radio man checked the truck's own set. It was still powered on. He put on his headset and listened, brow furrowing. "You hear that?" he asked finally, passing me one earpiece. I heard a soft hiss, then a gentle rise and fall, like somebody breathing slow through cloth. Not quite static, not quite anything I'd heard from a radio before. The rhythm bothered me in a way I couldn't explain. It was too regular to be noise, too smooth to be an accident. "Damage channel?" the captain asked. The radio man shook his head. "If it is, it's the neatest damage I've ever heard." Up on the road, the Honduran soldiers stood in a loose half-circle, peering down into the cut. One of them made a small, quick hand sign I recognized from villages, a gesture to push away bad luck. I didn't blame him. Even from below, I could feel their fear drifting down like a second fog. The lieutenant finally asked what everyone was thinking. "Guerrillas," he said. "They crash it. Take the men, move on." It would have been the simple answer, but guerrillas did not leave full magazines. They did not leave helmets, belts, and radios intact, and they did not erase tracks like a sponge across paper. The captain radioed our controller, gave a brief report, and waited for orders. What came back was short and unsatisfying. Hold the site, keep radios clear, wait for further instructions. No explanation, no help, just stay with the ghost truck in the silent jungle. We set a perimeter and stayed on our guard until our eyes ached from staring at the same trees. Every few minutes I would walk the slope, looking for new sign I knew I wouldn't find. It felt like inspecting a photograph instead of a real place. Nothing changed. The birds did not return. The insects stayed quiet. Even the wind seemed to go around the ravine instead of through it. Around mid-morning, the green glow on the dashboard began to fade slightly as the battery weakened. Yet it never went out. The captain frowned at that, closed the cab door to block the sunlight, and the glow still leaked out in thin lines around the frame. The medic joined me by the drums for a moment. He took a cautious breath and then stepped back fast, rubbing his chest with the back of his hand. "That's not any fertilizer I've used," he said under his breath. "Smells too clean, too manufactured." His voice drifted off as if he didn't want to finish the thought. Our youngest shooter held a position overlooking the bend where the trail dipped deeper into the brush. When I checked on him, he wouldn't take his eyes off the road. "Feels like someone's about to walk around that corner," he whispered. "Been feeling like that for an hour." "You see anything?" I asked. "No," he said, shaking his head. "That's the part that bothers me." The hours dragged. Another message finally came in asking for more detail about the cargo and the condition of the truck. The captain answered with bare facts. leaving out the smell, the silence, the strange radio pattern. I understood why. You don't send rumors over a wire. You wait until you've got something solid enough to stand on. Problem was, everything about that place felt like cloud. By the time the shadows had shifted and the sun reached its highest point, the medic's breathing had grown shallow. He coughed once, then again, a dry sound he tried to swallow. He kept insisting he was fine, but I watched the way his hand never strayed far from his chest. The radio man recorded more of the static from the truck set. When he played it back, the pattern was clearer: rise, fall, pause, repeat. It gave me the sense of something counting, not in numbers but in slow, patient breaths. That afternoon, as the light softened and the green dash glow held on stubbornly, the jungle around us felt less like a forest and more like a closed room. We could feel the walls even if we couldn't see them. Then night came. The captain tightened our perimeter around the wreck. No fires, no lights, just shaded flashlights when absolutely necessary. I took a spot above the cab where I had a view of both road and ravine. The sweet chemical scent drifted up in faint waves. Each time it reached me, I found myself holding my breath on instinct before forcing air back into my lungs. The medic's cough came every so often, softer each time, as if he didn't want to disturb the quiet that was already smothering us. The radio man sat near the truck with his headset on, tracing lines in his notebook whenever the pattern shifted. At some point after midnight, he touched my arm without a word and handed me an earpiece. The sound from the truck had changed. The rise and fall were still there, but now strange little gaps broke the rhythm, like someone holding their breath for a heartbeat and then letting it out. It wasn't code, at least nothing I'd ever been trained to hear. It wasn't natural noise either. "You hear it," he whispered. "Feels like it's learning." I didn't like that choice of word. The captain listened next, his face unreadable, then told the radio man to keep recording, but stay off the air unless ordered. We were not going to start a conversation with whatever that pattern was. Around then, something shifted on the far side of the ravine. I didn't see branches move. I didn't hear a snap of twig. I just felt a pressure change, a heaviness, like the air itself had inhaled. One of the Honduran soldiers closest to the slope stiffened, rifle jerking up toward the dark. I signaled him to lower it slowly. His hands shook even after he did. Our youngest shooter whispered that he'd seen a shadow pause near the bend in the road. When I joined him and stared at the spot for a long minute, all I saw was still trees and the suggestion of movement that probably came from my own pulse in my ears. "Maybe I'm tired," he said. "We all are," I answered, but I didn't tell him. I believed he'd seen something. Men like him didn't imagine that kind of thing. Not in that tone of voice. Sometime after 1 in the morning, the Honduran lieutenant hurried to our captain, eyes wide. One of his men was missing. The soldier had been posted at the lowest point of the road, beside a thick tree trunk. Now the spot was empty. His rifle leaned against the bark. His pack lay open on the ground, untouched. No footprints leading away, no scuffle, no drag marks. Just the faint imprint of boots where someone had stood for hours and then ceased to exist. The captain took 2 of us down to search. I circled the tree, checked the slope, even scanned the branches overhead, though there was no reason for a man to go climbing in the dark. Nothing. The dirt beyond his post looked as untouched as the road we'd walked in on. The lieutenant swore the soldier would never abandon his rifle. I believed him. A man might panic, might run, but he does not run without his weapon in a place like that. We pulled our perimeter tighter, shoulders nearly touching in some spots. Fear slid through the Honduran ranks like cold water. They kept glancing at the ravine as if the truck might rise up out of it and walk on its own. Our medic's cough grew worse. When I checked him, he said he tasted metal with every breath, a thin, bitter tang that wouldn't go away. There was no fever, no wheeze in his lungs like an infection, just a tightening he couldn't escape. "It's probably the climb," he said, trying to smile. We both knew better. Near dawn, when the sky began to pale, the radio man rushed to the captain again. The static pattern from the truck had changed once more, this time beneath the soft hiss and that odd breathing rhythm. A low murmur had appeared. a tone that rose and fell too slowly to be a voice, too structured to be accident. When he briefly unplugged the set, the sound cut instantly. When he plugged it back in, the same murmur came back perfectly, like something waiting at the end of the line. Then something happened that I still think about whenever a radio crackles in a quiet room. While we were tightening our gear and waiting for orders, a word slipped through the headset in a thin, broken whisper. Not English, Spanish. Regresan, return. The radio man went pale. The Honduran lieutenant heard it too and stepped back as if struck. The captain took the handset and called our controller on a different secure channel. This time the reply came clean, our normal authentication tones, a voice we recognized. For a moment, the strange hum faded, drowned by regular comms. The captain listened, jaw clenched, then turned to us with the kind of expression that never leads to a good day. "Orders are in," he said. "We document everything, then destroy the truck and its cargo. No recovery, no samples, nothing left behind. When we're done, we move 2 clicks west to a pickup point. We sweep once more for the missing man at first light, and then we go." No one argued. We were all ready to leave that place, even if it meant leaving questions behind. When daylight fully reached the ravine, we walked the area again, slower now, forcing ourselves to look for any detail we'd missed while the darkness pressed on us. That was when I saw the old paint beneath the dust on the truck's side panel. Faint scratches ran along the metal where another layer of paint had once been. I brushed away grime and saw an older symbol, nearly identical to the current unit, marking but worn, like it had been there years before. The captain studied it, lips pressed thin. Nothing about that truck felt new anymore. The radio man, meanwhile, noticed a thin sheen around the lid of one drum, a barely visible ring where something had leaked and then dried. When he leaned closer, the sweet smell hit him harder. He flinched back, eyes watering. The medic came over, held the back of his glove near the residue, inhaled just enough to catch the scent, and then immediately retreated. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. We all understood the look he gave the captain. Whatever was in that drum was not meant to sit in open air, not even in such a small amount. While we were processing that, our youngest shooter and 2 Honduran soldiers called us farther down the trail. In a patch of disturbed soil near a tree root, they'd found scraps of old cloth and a metal disc half buried in the dirt. The disc was an ID tag. American. The name on it wasn't one I knew, but the year stamped on the edge went back long before our presence in that area. The captain turned it over twice, reading it under his breath, then slipped it into his pocket with the same care he'd used on the manifest. The Honduran lieutenant crossed himself again, slower this time. It was no longer just about his missing man. We returned to the truck and began photographing everything. The cab, the drums, the trail, the lack of tracks. The radio man circled with a small camera, taking shots from every angle, but he kept glancing into the smashed windshield as if he expected to see someone sitting inside. When I asked him about it, he said that each time the sunlight hit the glass just right, he thought he saw movement behind it, a shape leaning forward, then gone. I looked. All I saw was reflective shards, the steering wheel, and that stubborn green light that refused to die. When I reopened the manifest to photograph it, I noticed something else. The top layer of writing was clean enough, but when I tilted the paper, faint indentations showed underneath, marks from words that had been written on a sheet above and then removed. I shifted the angle until the sun caught them just right and traced the ghost lines with my eyes. The words didn't match the cover story. I caught parts of terms from briefings long before this mission, phrases related to decontamination, handling protocols, coded references to materials that officially didn't leave secure labs. The world felt a little narrower around me as I understood what those drums might really hold. I showed the captain. He didn't swear, he didn't shout, he just exhaled through his nose in a long, careful breath, then told us to get ready to place charges. We were going to turn that truck and its cargo into something no one could piece together again. While the others prepared the thermite, I walked a bit farther down the ravine, drawn by a patch of earth that looked slightly different from the rest. It had a subtle dip, like a scar in the landscape. When I scraped away some of the soil with my knife, rust greeted me. A curve of metal, the suggestion of a wheel, then the edge of a cab half swallowed by roots. Another truck, same model, same angle, buried deeper, rusted and collapsed, as if it had crashed many years before and slowly sunk into the ground. I called the captain and the lieutenant. They stared at it in silence. The captain brushed away more dirt, revealing the same old unit markings under the decay. "No one told you about a wreck here?" he asked the lieutenant. "No, or," the man replied. His voice sounded small in that open space. "Nothing in records, nothing from my seniors, just stories." "What kind of stories?" I asked. "About trucks with no lights that pass at night," he said. "Years ago, men in villages say they hear engines, then nothing. Our commanders say it's just imagination." No one answered. We didn't need to. Between the buried wreck and the ID tag, imagination had lost its case. Back at the main truck, the radio man and the youngest shooter laid out the charges. They worked methodically, sliding metal sheets under the drums, wiring the thermite around them, checking and rechecking fuses until the medic nodded approval. Even from his spot a few steps back, hand pressed to his ribs, I walked the perimeter one last time, and that was when I saw the third remnant, a rusted wheel frame under a torn strip of canvas farther along the slope, nearly devoured by moss. It looked like it belonged to yet another vehicle, one that had burned and collapsed long ago. 3 trucks, same route, same hill, different years, same silence. When the captain contacted our controller with a final brief, his words were tight, his sentences short. The answer that came back left no room for interpretation. Complete destruction, no recovery. Immediate exfil once done. Whatever had been moving along that road through the years, somebody far away had decided the story ended today, at least on paper. The charges went in. We climbed to the ridge, double-checked our distance, and the radio man triggered the detonator. A bright flash flared from the ravine, followed by a wave of white heat. For a second, it looked normal: fire, smoke, debris. But the smoke didn't act the way smoke should. Instead of rising in a thick column and then thinning, it rolled along the ground, curling and sliding into gullies, clinging to trees as if guided by invisible hands. Even from that ridge, the sweet chemical scent reached us, sharper now, forcing some of us to pull cloth over our mouths. The Honduran soldiers stepped back, whispering prayers under their breath. As I watched, I heard a faint metallic groan from below, like something twisting in slow motion. I peered down and saw a dim green shimmer through the smoke where the cab had been. It pulsed once, weak but unmistakable, and then faded. The youngest shooter muttered that the thermite should have eaten through everything electrical by then. No battery should still give light. The captain told us to keep moving. He didn't look back again. We left that ridge in a staggered line, heading toward the pickup point. The trail felt different now under our boots, heavier somehow, as if the ground remembered every wheel that had passed over it. Behind us, the smoke hugged the valley like fog that didn't know it was supposed to rise. Ahead of us, the jungle looked the same as it always did. Green, dense, indifferent. But I knew, in my bones, that we had just walked away from the center of something much larger than our little mission. And this is the part where I need you to stay with me, because what happened on that walk out, what followed us in ways we couldn't see, is the hand on the back of your neck in this story. The thing that makes you turn your head at night when a radio pops or a truck passes on a dark road. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and stay locked in, because the mountain wasn't done with us yet. The air didn't clear as we moved farther from the ravine it should have. Smoke should thin, sounds should return. The jungle should pick up its ordinary noise. Instead, the silence marched beside us. The medic's breathing grew more strained, each inhale sounding like it cost him something. He insisted on walking under his own power, but I stayed close in case his legs gave out. The radio man kept his set on, scanning frequencies as we climbed. The hum he'd heard earlier came back, faint at first, and then stronger, sliding under different channels, even when he switched bands. It was like a song that didn't care what station it played on. At one point, the captain ordered him to power the radio down entirely. For a blessed few minutes, we heard nothing but our own boots and the rustle of our gear. Then the controller called to confirm our movement, and the set had to go live again. The hum slipped back into the background, like it had been waiting. When we reached a low pass between two stony outcrops, one of the Honduran soldiers signaled a halt. He'd spotted something in a tree hollow off the side of the trail. We approached cautiously, rifles ready. Inside the hollow, hanging like forgotten laundry, were torn strips of old uniform cloth, sun-faded and brittle. I lifted one with the tip of my knife and saw fragments of lettering, the remains of a name tape in a style our own army had abandoned years ago. No bones, no gear, no sign of who had worn it, just fabric allowed to rot slowly out of sight. The lieutenant swallowed hard. "Villagers talk," he said softly. "They say sometimes trucks climb these roads at night with no lights, and sometimes they never come back down. Command tells us not to listen." I let the cloth fall. Something about putting it back felt wrong, as if we were tucking the story in to sleep again. The captain didn't say anything. He just urged us forward with sharper gestures than before. The jungle gave way eventually to taller grass and a more open slope. Beyond the last rise lay the landing zone, a flat stretch of rock and dirt where the helicopter would pick us up. From up there, the valley behind us looked deceptively peaceful. A few wisps of smoke still clung to the trees, trailing along like mist. The captain set a perimeter while the radio man contacted our ride. As he keyed the mic, a short burst of static exploded from the speaker, louder than anything we'd heard all day. Beneath it, just for a heartbeat, I heard that same hum. Then another fractured Spanish word I couldn't quite catch. The Honduran lieutenant made a choking sound and stepped back. The captain snatched the handset, switched to a separate encrypted channel, and called again. This time the response came clear from our controller, and the interference faded like someone had stepped out of the line. "Birds inbound," the captain said. 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like 10 miles. While we waited, I glanced back toward the ridge. For an instant, I saw a dull green flicker between the trees, far off where the road curved out of sight. It could have been sunlight on glass. It could have been my imagination, tired and stretched thin. But it looked too familiar, too steady. And when I blinked, it was gone. The helicopter came in low from the west, blades chopping the air into hard beats. As the pilot circled once, fighting crosswinds, I helped the medic to his feet. Our youngest shooter moved to his other side. The radio man stood in the center of our loose ring, headset back on despite everything, because that was his duty. As the rotor wash hit us and the birds settled, I looked down the slope one last time. Near the tree line, where the shadows were thickest, shapes seemed to stand between the trunks, tall, still forms that didn't sway with the branches. They looked like silhouettes of men watching us, heads tilted slightly upward. Then the dust kicked up, my eyes watered, and when I wiped them clear, the shapes were gone. "Move," the captain shouted. The Honduran soldiers scrambled aboard, first. Then, the medic with our support. The lieutenant climbed in after his men, looking back over his shoulder as if he expected someone to call his name. The radio man hesitated at the ramp, caught by another faint hiss in his headset, and I had to tug his arm to break his focus. As I stepped toward the bird, a few distant cracks echoed from somewhere down the valley. Not close enough to be a threat, more like shots fired a long way off and carried strangely by the hills. The youngest shooter turned sharply, but the captain shoved him up the ramp. "Nothing there we can help," he said, and his tone ended the discussion. We lifted off. As the helicopter climbed, I watched the valley slide away beneath us. 2 dark scars marked the place where the trucks had lain, fresh black mixed with older rust-colored stains. The smoke no longer rose. It flowed sideways along the ground, curling into the forest in thin sheets, slipping between tree roots, vanishing into places we'd never walk. The radio man finally removed his headset. "It's gone," he mouthed, though his eyes said he wasn't sure if he believed it. Back at the forward site, everything moved with that strange normal rhythm that makes you feel like you've imagined what just happened. Medics took our medic straight to the clinic. The Honduran lieutenant and his men disappeared toward their own compound with tight faces and downcast eyes. Agency people in plain clothes waited near the hangar. They didn't ask if we were okay. They took the manifest, the photographs, the recorder, and later, quietly, that old American ID tag. Then they led us into a windowless room and told us to talk. The debrief ran long. The captain laid out the mission from insertion to extraction in a calm, flat voice. The agency men wrote notes without letting their expressions change. When it was my turn, I described the second buried truck, the third rusted wheel, the lack of tracks, the silence, the way the smoke moved. One of them held up a hand when I mentioned the ID tag. "We'll handle that part," he said. "You don't need to speculate." They let the radio man talk about the static pattern and the word we'd heard at the landing zone. But when he started to say that the hum felt almost intentional, the chemical officer in the corner shifted and the question died on his lips. They read us a short statement from the clinic about our medic, lung irritation, likely from environmental factors. No long-term danger, they said. He'd be sent home early as a precaution. The words were neat. They sounded like they'd been written long before he'd even been examined. When the debrief ended, they told us the official record would show a Honduran military truck losing its brakes on a bad mountain road. Cargo listed exactly as the label claimed: fertilizer. No mention of missing crews, no mention of previous wrecks, no mention of strange signals or unexplained disappearances. Our presence would be recorded as routine cooperation, nothing more. Do you understand? One of the men asked. The captain said yes. We all understood, and none of us liked it. Days passed, but the valley didn't. Our medic was flown out, still coughing, still complaining of a metallic taste in the back of his throat. Before he left, he told me that during the night in the clinic, when the ward was quiet and the only sound should have been the fan above his bed, he thought he heard that same slow hum coming from the ventilation ducts. He knew it didn't make sense. He said it anyway. Our youngest shooter cleaned his rifle over and over, more for something to do than because it needed it. "You think there were more trucks?" he asked me once, staring south toward the border hills. "Not just those 3 other roads." I told him I didn't know. That was the only honest answer. The radio man kept reaching for headphones that weren't on his ears, fingers twitching like he still felt the pattern against his skull. He asked once, very quietly, if I believed that last word we'd heard, return, was meant for us or someone else. I told him I didn't want to know. He laughed once, without humor, and stopped asking. On our last evening before we rotated out, the captain called us together. His face looked older than when we'd gone into the hills. He told us the file was closed, that we wouldn't be tasked back to that area, that the best thing we could do was accept the official version and move on. None of us argued. We knew some things, if you push too hard at them, push back. That night, I lay awake longer than I should have. Every time I started to drift, I saw the truck again, resting on its side as if gently placed, the green light glowing in the cab, the empty ground around it. I saw the second wreck buried in dirt, the third wheel frame hidden under torn canvas. I heard the slow, patient pattern of the static, like a breath that belonged to the valley itself. Years have passed since that mission. I've seen my share of firefights and ambushes, watched men fall and get back up and not get back up. But nothing from those days visits my dreams as often as that silent road in Honduras and a truck that should have told a simple story and instead refused any story at all. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and the dash of my car glows a soft green, I catch my own reflection in the glass, and for a moment I'm back on that slope, staring at a light that will not die and asking myself how 5 men can vanish without leaving a single print in soft earth. I know now that some answers are never meant for the people who carry the questions. Someone higher than us decided what went into the reports. Someone drew lines on a map and marked that valley as a place to forget. But forgetting doesn't always work. Not when you've seen smoke that crawls instead of rises. Not when you've heard a radio call you back in a voice that isn't yours. And not when you've walked away knowing that the road behind you has been swallowing crews for longer than anyone wants to admit. I can't give you a neat ending. There's no secret file I stole, no confession in a lost memo that explains what those drums really held, or why so many trucks went missing on that same stretch of mountain. All I can tell you is what I saw, what I smelled, what I heard, and how the silence of that place has stayed louder in my life than any gunfight. Maybe somewhere there's a warehouse full of reports that mention brake failure more times than statistics should allow. Maybe somewhere a handful of names are still sitting in a drawer, marked missing with no further action. And maybe that valley is still there, quiet and waiting, the way it waited for us. What I know for certain is this: a mission that looked simple on paper became the one story I cannot put down, the one that still leans over my shoulder whenever a radio clicks on in a dark room. If you've listened this far, you already feel a piece of what we carried out of that ravine. Don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next, because this wasn't the last time a simple assignment turned into something no report could ever safely hold. And if you want to understand how far these shadows really reach, you'll want to be here for the next story. Share this with someone who thinks every mystery has an answer in a file somewhere. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me, if a road like that existed near you, would you drive it in the dark, knowing that some vehicles go in full and come out empty, leaving only a green light and a question behind?